Intervista has a lot.
Let me take a look and see what I have.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We're just getting everybody in from the waiting room, and I'm sure folks are still logging on and figuring all that out. That always takes a minute or two for people. So we'll give it a second before we get started, but appreciate everybody being here.
Where they're like, yeah, we just discovered we have like 10 vendors that don't even have contracts with us.
Okay. Also, a good reminder to try to stay on mute. Sometimes, depending on your Zoom that you're joining on, it doesn't automatically mute you when you pop on. So always fun to work the technology. We've had a morning of technology faux pas today, I will tell you already. So we're hoping this one goes a lot smoother.
Technology is your friend until it's not.
Right. Maybe a point we'll talk about a little bit more today. So that may be a good start. And it seems like we're leveling off. So we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karen Pank. And for those of you who don't know, I'm the CPOC Executive Director. And, I'm joined by Katie Flores, who's also going to be running some of the technology for today. You should have been asked about this being recorded when you joined. So just as a good reminder, we are recording this and we will eventually post it on our website. So you'll have an opportunity to learn all about the things that we're going to be talking about today, but also kind of go back to it for reference, because these informational workshops, we have found a great opportunity to share, emerging practices, information, different things that can be helpful to the operation of probation services. And this is no different. So we're pleased to welcome our Fieldware services is a probation partner for CPOC, and they have really put together an exciting afternoon here where we're going to dive into some of the most recently posted APPA Supervision standards and really how you utilize technology and in that regard, and what kinds of things might be of use for some of you. So we will turn it over to our speakers so we can jump right into it. One little bit of housekeeping. We're going to go ahead and hold for questions until the end, but if you want, feel free to put the questions in the chat as we go. Just I know sometimes as things pop in, it may be helpful for both the presenters as well as others to be thinking about some of the things that we'll want to talk about at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers. We have William Burrell, Jason Mereness, and Karen Peterson. And so I'm going to turn it over to them to kind of walk through the PowerPoint and the presentation. And again, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Burrell. I'm on the other coast. I'm in New Jersey, so it's the end of the day for me here. I'm going to start off the session talking about the APPA standards and technology and risk assessment. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. So where do we begin? Let's start with the APPA standards. The national standards for community supervision were released in June of 2024, this year. It was a product of 4.5 years of work and was supported by the National Institute of Corrections. We had a public comment period following the publication, which ended just last week, and the final edition to come out will reflect the public comments. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at the standards. It's a fairly substantial document, but if you haven't, you can go to the APPA website and download a copy there. It's important to know that the standards are what we call an aspirational document. That is, not every department is going to be able to meet all the standards completely right away. Okay. But the standards are a compilation of the best knowledge we have about how to do the work of community supervision of adults on probation and parole. Now, I know that in California, most of the departments have both adult and juvenile under their jurisdiction, except for San Francisco. I expect, I don't have any firm information about it, but I expect that APPA will undertake a similar kind of effort to develop standards for juvenile supervision and for administrative practices as well. And so today we're going to start talking about two of the standards, standard 3.1, which is agencies should adopt and implement empirically developed and validated risk and need assessments, and 3.4, using screening instruments to identify low risk clients and assigning them to minimal supervision caseloads. Okay. Next slide, please. Now you'll see on the standards there, there's the black letter standard itself, and then each is followed by an extensive commentary. And commentaries are the explanation, the rationale for the standards, and the research that underlies the standard itself. Okay, so here we're talking about validation, professionally developed standards, and so on. So it is a important supplement to the standards themselves, helping you understand where they came from, what their rationale is, and what supports it in terms of the standard itself. Okay, next slide, please. And we have a poll for you here, which I believe Katie's going to administer for us. Okay.
Are you able to see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because I see people answering. So
Good. Now, my guess would be here that you have very high utilization of risk and need assessments in the California system, but I could always be surprised.
Bill, can you see the results?
No, I don't see the results.
So 93% of the people said yes, 7% said no.
Okay. Well, good. And I was right. Okay. Going on to the next one.
Good. There we go.
So I want to talk a little bit about the origin of the standards. In 2006, APPA published an issue paper on caseload standards for probation and parole, and it was the first time that APPA took a formal position prescribing numerical standards in terms of an actual number of cases that probation and parole officers should supervise. And to say the least, these were very aspirational for most departments. Lots of folks had questions. A lot of CPOs would say to me, how in the world am I ever going to be able to meet these standards without more staff or more funding? Obviously, two things that are very difficult to come by in our field, which is, really that's the $64,000 question. But I wrote a piece there, you'll see the Community Corrections Report, where I said the answer is kind of like a Jeopardy question, the answer is low risk offenders. And first thing I would think people would want to do is take a look at the risk profile of their caseload, how many are low risk, and these are the clients that you should consider for alternatives to regular active supervision. Okay. Next slide, please. So why should we be looking at these clients and putting them in an alternative to regular supervision? Well, as you most know, that low-risk clients have a low likelihood of reoffending. We did risk research in New Jersey probation, where I worked for many years, and we found our low-risk clients had a reoffending rate of 8% in the first year of their supervision. And the first year of supervision is when most of the recidivism happened. So 8% was a pretty good rate to consider for moving people into a less intensive supervision model. Low-risk offenders have a low need for services and supervision. Providing supervision for them takes up scarce and valuable PO time. Many of the low-risk offenders have positive things going on in their lives. They have a job, a supportive family, and such. And over-supervising can make things worse, causing recidivism. So, for example, if people have overly demanding supervision requirements like reporting, that can often interrupt positive pro-social activities like working, okay? And think about having low-risk clients sitting in a waiting room, the probation department or parole office waiting to see their PO associating with higher risk clients, kind of a contamination effect. So this is a population that we can consider for an alternative that's much less demanding on our resources and enable us to reduce caseloads for active supervision. Okay, next slide, please. Standard 3.4, as I mentioned, talks about risk screening instruments. The major risk need assessment instruments, such as the ORAS and the LSIR, have screening versions, which are shorter, maybe 6 to 8 questions, which get at the core risk variables, and they can be administered relatively quickly compared with the full risk assessment, and identify those clients that are in that minimal risk category. So the idea here is to do the screening at intake, and if the client comes out as low risk, don't let them get into the regular caseloads, put them in an administrative or a minimum supervision caseload. So experience has told us that once cases get into the regular caseload, it's hard to get them out, right? And why is that? Well, low-risk clients are usually easier to supervise. They're compliant, they show up, they pay their fees, they produce clean drug tests. All this makes the PO look good and certainly relieves some of the pressure on them in terms of dealing with their total caseload. All right. So in some ways, low-risk clients can be like a security blanket. The PO can say, look, you can't make me do X, and you fill in the blank what you want them to do, because I have too many cases. Okay. So the question that comes up is, how much supervision should we be providing to the low-risk offenders? Well, minimal, if any, face-to-face contacts, I would suggest. Limited conditions of supervision. The more supervision conditions we have, the more time is involved in terms of monitoring that and holding people accountable. So minimal amount of monitoring for compliance, obviously monitoring for new criminal activity, and consider technology-based tools for monitoring to take a lot of the burden off of the officers, and looking at early termination, early discharge for low-risk cases. If they've made it through that first year without any problems, consider taking it back to court for an early discharge application. So shifting these cases out of the traditional caseloads and into larger low-risk administrative caseloads enables you to lower the caseloads of the other POs. And one of the things we do know about evidence-based practices in our field is that doing the full EBP model takes more time than a minimal supervision trail them, nail them, and jail them type of operation. So wherever we can find ways to lower the caseloads of the moderate and high risk supervision officers, the better off we will be. Next slide, please. And a good example of I think of a low risk supervision program is in the Florida Department of Corrections. They screen for a risk at intake, and if it comes out low risk, they assign it directly to the administrative caseload telephone reporting operation. They don't do office visits. They don't see the person or supervise them directly. And I like this particular part of it too. Early termination application to the court or the parole board happens at the first year, and it's mandatory. They don't leave it up to the POs to get around to doing it. It's part of the policy to make that application at the end of the year, assuming, of course, that there hasn't been any problems with the supervision. Okay. Now, as you're thinking about this, a couple of key things from my experience, issues to keep in mind. Keep your judges and your key stakeholders, such as the district attorney and county supervisors, keep them informed and involved early and often. Get their buy-in and support. So the last thing you want to have happen is for them to find out about your low-risk caseload policy from an article in the newspaper about a notorious offense committed by someone in the low-risk caseload. And the important thing to remember is that low risk does not mean no risk. So there's always the possibility of that happening, and people should be prepared for it. And those key stakeholders should be on board with it as well. It's critical to train your POs well on risk assessment. And that means more than just how do you score the instrument. They need to know what these are and how they work. Right? And research has shown that POs for the most part, don't trust risk and need assessments. And when they don't, they find other ways to deal with the assessment process. And that's why it's important for you to consider developing a robust quality assurance, quality control capacity within your agency to monitor the risk assessment process and ensure that people are doing the assessments the way they should be doing it. Next slide, please. And we have a poll for you here. Do you have policies in place that drive levels of supervision based on risk and need? Katie?
Okay, Bill, so it looks like we have 98% that do have policies and 2% who said they do not.
Very good. Great. Thank you.
Good shape.
Okay. Next slide, please.
There you go.
Now, the issue of trust in the risk need assessment is important because if they don't trust it, they'll take a couple of different approaches. First is what we call score and ignore. They'll complete the risk and need assessment, put it in the file, and then supervise the client at the level they feel is appropriate. Second approach is to manipulate the scoring of the risk assessment instrument to produce the level, again, that they feel is appropriate. And then lastly, officers will override the risk need assessment to produce the supervision at a level that they feel is appropriate. And in all of these situations, it's important to remember that the supervisor should be reviewing the risk and need assessments and providing quality control to ensure compliance with policies. And with research on risk assessment overrides is really interesting. And they find that almost always officers increase the supervision level. They rarely decrease the supervision level. And these increases don't produce the desired result. As officers may think they need to provide greater supervision to have lower recidivism. And what happens is that they increase the supervision to a higher level. And when you compare those cases with those left at low risk supervision, they have the same failure rates. So you're using up more resources and not getting any better outcomes from the supervision process. Okay, and again, this is a quality assurance issue for the for supervisors. So one of my pet peeves is do better training on risk and need assessments for officers. Again, as I said, not just how do you score them, but what are actuarial instruments? What does that word mean? How are they developed? What's their track record? What do they tell you? What are their limitations and their strengths? We know that, for example, people throw around the term risk prediction, and actuarial instruments are not risk predictions for individual people. Rather, they produce probability statements for groups of people who share similar characteristics. Okay. These instruments do a better job than human judgment, but they're not perfect. So, for example, the best risk and need assessment instruments out there, there's a statistic called the AUC, the area under the curve. And all you really need to know about that is that it's like a percentage of accuracy. So the best RNAs that we have in our field today have AUCs of 0.7 to 0.75, which basically means they're giving you the right assessment, accurate assessment, 70 to 70%, 5% of the time, which still leaves you with 25% where it wasn't correct. And that's an important fact for people to understand, is that the instruments are limited in terms of what they tell you. And there are errors, and errors include things that we call false positives, where you have a high risk score, but the client doesn't recidivate, and false negatives, which are probably the more problematic ones, where there's a low risk score, but the client recidivates. Okay, so the probation officers need to understand this and let that inform their risk assessment judgments, because we know there are things in the lives of clients that are not included in the risk assessment that can increase the accuracy of the assessment. We cannot include everything potentially that might be of interest in a risk assessment instrument. They need to be shorted up to be manageable and useful. But they're a well-designed override policy would recognize that officers can see things, can find things in the background and specific responsivity factors and other things that are not included in the risk assessment, but are relevant to the assessment. And those things ought to be discussed with the supervisor, and officer make a case for the override. And if they made a good case, then it would be granted. Okay. Next slide, please. And helping officers understand the risk and need assessment and how it's constructed and how it operates and so on can help avoid some of the popular misuses of overrides. Sometimes officers will use information to justify their override that's already in the risk and need assessment. For example, prior record. PO might say, look at the prior record. It's so long and so bad. Clearly, this person's high risk. Every risk and need assessment instrument assesses prior history, so don't double count it by using it to justify an override. And officers also use information that's unrelated to risk. A popular example of this is using offense seriousness to drive risk. And we know that offense seriousness is not the same thing as risk. In fact, some of the less serious offenders, property offenders, are some of our most busiest offenders. So just because they didn't commit a violent crime doesn't mean there's not a risk of them reoffending. Okay. And one other thing that I think that, well, let's do this poll. Go ahead, we'll do the poll. Can you override or step down clients to lower levels of supervision based on completion of conditions?
Okay, this time it looks like we are at about 86% who said
Okay.
yes, they can do that. And then about 16 who said no, they cannot.
Okay. Good. Okay, next slide, please. Mhm.
Maybe.
Oh, okay. Well, before I turn it over to Jason, I just want to talk about one last point. Probation officers often use the fear of liability as a reason to override cases to a higher level of supervision. They're worried that if they score somebody as low risk and they go on to commit an offense, particularly a notorious offense, that they'll be at risk of being sued and being found liable for damages. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of governmental immunity laws and employee liability laws. Almost all states, I think the only exception is Washington State, have an employee immunity laws that protect government employees from liability. And in essence, what these laws provide is that if you follow agency policy and procedure and you act in good faith, you can't be held liable for the results of a decision that you made. Now, I'm not familiar with California's law on this, so you should check it out. But it's important for people to understand that when they get into trouble is when they don't follow agency policy and procedure and they make a decision based on their own judgment and feelings. That's when the exposure to liability occurs. And unfortunately, you can always be sued, but the likelihood of being found liable is extremely low. And the late Rolando del Carmen, he was a professor at Sam Houston State University and was the expert on probation and parole liability, characterized the situation this way. He said, some POs, fearful of liability, transferred all their assets to their spouses. And the likelihood of divorcing in the United States at that point in time was 50%, and the odds of sustained liability claim were negligible. So having a good understanding of how the liability law works in California is an important thing. So summarizing, basically, my points are, it's really important to train staff well on the risk need assessments and have a robust quality control capacity in your supervisor cadre to ensure that the assessments are right, and then moving to a caseload structure where you've got the ability to put lots of low risk cases in large caseloads and reduce their demand on your resources. So thank you for your time and your attention. I'm going to turn it over to Jason at this point.
All right, thank you, Bill. And hello, everyone. Jason Mereness, if you can go to the next slide, I'll kind of just do a quick overview of who is this guy talking and why should we care. So my name is Jason Mereness. I'm an adult probation supervisor in Ramsey County, St. Paul, Minnesota. So Ramsey County Community Corrections. I'm also a member of the APPA Technology Committee, their AI subcommittee. I work, do some other committee work with Corrections Technology Association, Minnesota Corrections Association. So I've got my hands on a lot of technology, but most importantly, I'm in the people business and we supervise folks. So let me tell you a little bit about Ramsey County in case you're not familiar with them. Our vision, vibrant community where all are valued and thrived, and a mission, a county of excellence working with you to enhance our quality of life. For those of you more familiar with the term Twin Cities, that's kind of where we're at. St. Paul's the capital city. And the county itself is consists of 18 cities, 1 township. We work very closely with Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis. One thing that's very unique to Ramsey County is that we're the most diverse and densely populated state. So we've got a very unique population of folks we work with. So that's us in a nutshell. I'm hoping to kind of just showcase what Bill talked about here today in action. So we can go to the next slide. A little bit more about our department. One thing that you may find unique is we're a county entity. So the Minnesota Department of Corrections oversees the state, but then the counties have their own county delivery systems. Ramsey County in particular houses their probation community corrections department under the health and wellness team, which allows us to work pretty closely with like other entities like social services, and allows us to do a little bit more rehabilitation focus versus like focus solely on like law and justice. Historically, we were under like safety and law and justice, but now we're under health and wellness. In terms of a snapshot, about 7,000 plus clients, probably closer to 8,000 at this point, people on adult probation supervision. We've got juvenile supervision as well, but I'm going to be focused on adult. That's where I work. The unit I supervise, which we'll talk about here in more detail in a second, is the Probation Service Center. And that is that low risk alternative unit that Bill was kind of describing. And we supervise 3,000 plus. I believe it's about 3,800 clients right now that we supervise. We'll dig a little bit more into that data here in a second, but as you can see, a good number of people are under that low risk supervision. We work pretty closely with our traditional field offices, and then we have some specialty units. So if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of lay that out a little bit more. Before I do that, technology. This session is focused on technology in terms of how do we apply what Bill talked about. I think we can all relate to having limited budgets, staffing shortages. There's not as many people interested in the work. It's harder to hold on to people doing the work. That was especially the case in Minnesota with the social unrest and the murder of George Floyd and all that happening right around where we're doing our work. We also find ourselves post-COVID in like a more of a flexible workplace. So there's less bricks and mortar corrections as many of us came up in or more used to. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We've moved to like a hybrid schedule where our agents are only expected to come into a physical building or county building at least twice a week. There's some people that have more than that, but that's the majority of folks are under that hybrid structure. There's also the conversations around caseload, workload. I know we continue to try to identify how do we measure those things, because oftentimes caseload becomes the default, and we look at how many people are on probation, and we know the standards, the 50 to 1s and those types of things. But there ends up being a lot of work that's involved in these things as well. So today, when I talk about the Probation Service Center and how we are an alternative to like regular supervision, don't lose sight of the fact that even though we're utilizing technology, that there's still some work involved in that. So some people use administrative probation and then visualize like a virtual file cabinet, right, where cases just sit. That sometimes is the case, and a lot of that's probation to the court in Minnesota is how they describe it. The department or the unit specifically I will be talking about today, the Probation Service Center, still requires a little bit of work, but we're doing that work in partnership with technology. So I'll talk a little bit more about that specific technology work as we move forward. Next slide, please. A little bit more about the Probation Service Center. I can tell you first and foremost, we were formerly called the Probation Reporting Center. It was the PRC. We are now the PSC. The reason that happened was because there became a negative connotation with reporting, and people actually started referring to the PRC as the Phone Reporting Center, which had a negative connotation in and of itself, and it also neglected to recognize the service we do provide people. So in terms of branding and language, that's important. So to this day, now we're the Probation Service Center PSC. And our goal is to remotely assist individuals in completing their probation requirements while being responsive to their needs and busy lives. That being said, we're focused on those low risk individuals, and to Bill's points, we don't want to cause more harm than good, right? So we offer supervision to adults on probation in Ramsey County who've been assessed as needing the lowest level of supervision. We'll talk a little bit more about the assessment piece here in a second. Probably most importantly, our approach allows for contact on an as needed basis. So to those same points about not over supervising people, not being too involved in their lives, especially if they're pro-social, especially if they're assessed as low risk, that's kind of our bread and butter, and that's the target client or folks we work with. We'll talk a little bit more about our supervision approach in case you have interest in doing something similarly here in a second, but most importantly, we are a team, which may sound unique to those who are familiar more with like individual caseloads. When I say a team, I have 11 agents that work directly for me that are overseeing the cases. At the same time, we're available in the sense that people can use technology to contact us through text, email, and the Fieldware reporting system at any time, where we can provide them that one-on-one support if it's needed and when it's needed. I see us as navigators. People do have these court-ordered conditions of probation. The judges are oftentimes very serious about the conditions that are ordered. And so although folks are assessed as low risk, we are supervising conditions and reporting that back to the court. And I'll talk here in a little bit about how we do that in a team environment. We provide information referrals to other providers and resources. So people are not in a virtual file cabinet. They have access to things, and our agents are actively involved in providing them as needed. And then, as I mentioned, we have convenient communication routes and reporting options. Historically, it was like, you better be here at this time in this place. That's not what we do. So we'll talk here in a minute about our over phone or online. They also can text us, email us, and then we'll talk a little bit how we do our initial office visit, which we call an orientation over video. So we do video visiting, not even requiring people to come into an office one time to get set up with us. And that hope piece is just kind of a mantra, former director John Clavin's built into our department. And that stands for helping people change, offering opportunity, providing accountability, and ensuring equity. So hope is in the hope star. We have kind of a whole like little visual that kind of drives our day-to-day work. So just wanted to share that because it's a powerful mantra for all of us. Next slide. So to give you a even better breakdown of these clients and the numbers, I threw it, just asked them our research and evaluation unit. They're a wonderful group of folks. Asked them to kind of pull what it's looked like in the past 10 years or so. If you look at this, you can probably start to deduct, look in 2020, you see you see a little bit of a reduction in cases because the courts weren't operating, other reasons, the COVID era there. But you find us in 2024 fairly close to where we were client number wise population as we were in like 2018. Now I say that while also just pointing out or asking you to consider, when I became the supervisor of this unit in 2018, our department and our court, we work with the Second Judicial Court of Minnesota. They had 18 exclusionary rules for when people could not come to the probation service center. So we would do our assessment. We would try to get people into the appropriate places for supervision, but the courts still had this distrust. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that resistance and pushback you may have from courts and other individuals here in a moment. But in 2018, we had 18 exclusionary rules. So you're looking at a number there that's reflective of that. Also at that time, Minnesota had longer probation sentences. So a lot of those folks in that 3,061 in 2018 may have 20-year probation sentences, and they're just kind of sitting there with everything done. They're just formally there. In 2020 or 2021, I can't remember a specific year, the state of Minnesota put a cap on most probation terms to 5 years. And so now we're living in a world where cases are only 5 years and that people are pretty active in what they're trying to get done. So a 3,400 or 3,043 client population in 2024 is a little different than 2018 because no one's just sitting there. People we're working with are actively open with conditions to complete, things to do. And so our agents are very busy. So I like earlier when you talked about low risk does not mean no risk because we do deal with other things happening. And we're also focused on that service piece of providing people resources and working with them. Next slide. And I promise not to data you all to death here, but data is nice to support the efforts. And we'll talk about how important that is, especially when you have to make the case for it. So case assignment, similarly to what Bill described in Florida, our intake our intake unit and our PSI units do an assessment on the front end. And so that determines whether someone ends up in a traditional field unit based on risk score, a specialty unit, and by specialty units, we have domestic abuse, DWI, community alternatives, and some other folks. You can see here, though, that risk is driving the assignment. That's the point I want to make here. And then you can see probation service center assessed on low risk and or after a period of supervision. We do have the ability to step down. So someone may be a medium risk client, go out to a field unit, and within 6 months, if they're stable and have got like their special conditions done. When I say special conditions, I mean the conditions ordered directly by the court. They have the ability to step down to us. And so we're working with initially assigned cases and cases stepping down to us. And in a minute, we'll talk about kind of how we've built in some incentives just within our supervision approach as well. The professional overrides there is that cautionary exclusionary rules. However, we still navigate a system that's bureaucratic and has history, and there's still some expectations or biases or what have you, systemic biases, whatever. So we do have that there in the event that someone may be assessed low risk, there is a potential for override. Those are rare. And as you consider doing something like this, I would encourage you to make that a rare occurrence as well. Next slide. Teamwork makes the dream work is our kind of quote. It really does make sense. And even the people who go, okay, that's corny, eventually are saying it themselves because using the backbone that is Fieldware to do our supervision. That's our case management software. Everybody's in there. If I do some work today, tomorrow Bill will probably see that work and have to pick up where I left off. So there's really no room for like working in silos or going rogue or those types of things. So when we talk about our supervision structure, it really is a team effort. I mentioned that I supervise 11 agents. My unit's called Probation Service Center East, and we have the Minnesota uses misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor, but for your purposes, it's probably just misdemeanors. We work those cases, and then we have a yang to our yang, if you will, the Probation Service Center West that has felony cases. So they're all assigned based on risk to us, but there's just 2 supervision units, and so there's another supervisor, a peer of mine, that supervises another 9 agents that work with those cases. So just snapshot real quick. We've got 1 full-time, 1 half-time support staff. They're doing a lot of the data entry. They're doing a lot of the mailing of documents. We also email documents to clients. So we provide them with either physical documents if that's what they prefer, or electronic. So we're very well versed in using digital signatures and stuff like that. Our assistant probation officer is kind of an entry-level position into our department. Those individuals can do basically anything up to court coverage, court documents. So a lot of the day-to-day condition monitoring and stuff like that, I'll talk about here in a second, our assistant probation officers do. There's less of them than probation officers. The probation officers, they're doing a lot of the, like I said, representing us in court, writing memos to the court, filing probation violations, you name it. There's kind of a progression there, but that's our structure. Our team is support staff, assistant probation officers, and then myself, all kind of working to make it happen. Next slide. So I'll talk here briefly about our supervision approach. I could spend 8 hours probably laying it all out for you and talking about all the pieces of technology we use. Like I said, we use the Fieldware software program, but we're also pretty active using Microsoft Teams. And so we have real-time communication there. Within our teams, if you're familiar, they have channels built in, and within those channels, we've built virtual waiting rooms, which is just a fancy term for a spreadsheet housed in Teams that any number of people can go into at any given time. So
But not to your match.
in a minute here,
Yeah,
sorry,
where's this
I'm
match?
getting some feedback. Okay. In a minute here, I'll kind of describe how we do those things, but just kind of knowing that we're kind of leaning heavily on technology, especially with no advertised walk-up services, a high volume of people being assigned to us directly from court, and then working with people to the success rates I hopefully, that I'll have a chance to show you here in a second. So in Cliff's notes, here's our supervision approach. There's assignment and review on the front end. So those who have a PSI, so pre-sentence investigation, have a full LSCMI completed, or a level of service case management inventory. Misdemeanors or same-day sentencings that don't have a PSI, they have the LSIRS done, so a screener tool done that determines where they go. So they're assigned to Probation Service Center. That would be our unit. We provide an initial orientation, which is basically just an initial office visit. You're probably familiar with that initial office visit where you go over the conditions of probation, the expectations, you do some role clarification, you provide them resources. They can put faces with names. We do all that over video visit. And what Fieldware has built in a video visit option that allows us to send clients links similar to a Zoom link or Teams link that they can click on and then join us. So you are on that front end seeing a person or having a conversation with a human being. So that can oftentimes take a lot of the stress, especially when you're trying to describe to somebody that you're going to be reporting to us through technology. The only reporting expectation we have to them from there forth is a monthly phone call. If that's their preference, they call in, it's automated, or they can use an online, our supervision to do their check-in. If you were to call it, you would call it on your, your birth month. So I'm born in December, the 12th month. So my expectation would be to report to us through that remote reporting system on the 12th of every month. And so we kind of just get clients up to speed, and that's when we're expecting to hear from them. Otherwise, we really don't need much. They can reach out to us anytime through our shared emails, our shared inboxes, and Outlook, which we're all working actively at any given time. And then, like I said, we're available to them when they need us, but we're not overly involved in their lives if they're not needing us to be. Condition work, what that means is the Fieldware system will prompt us as to whether people have conditions that are still outstanding. And so we work, those assistant probation officers do a lot of that day-to-day work where they get a number and it lists the conditions that are due. And they will kind of just divide and conquer and start reaching out to folks, email, phone, and just saying, hey, Karen, Bill, whoever, how are things going? Do you need more assistance with that? Can we set some goals and deadlines to get that done? So they're actively doing those things on a day-to-day basis. So when I say that teamwork makes the dream work, that's where that teamwork is happening, even in a unit where we're doing less overall supervision. There's still a lot of like administrative stuff that happens or providing that service. You could probably provide less service, but I would imagine on the back end there might be just a little bit of a difference in the outcomes. Case reviews, the system will prompt our POs, and I have one PO that's designated to this. When people are getting within 100 days, 90 days, 60 days, 30 days from expiration, it will alert us to where they're at, what's their status. Are they making their calls? Have they completed their conditions? Most times we're just saying yes, and then it's on to the next thing. So in other times we're writing memos to the court or having to file probation violations. We tend to not file violations until kind of near the end at 90, 60 days for technical, like special conditions. But if there's new arrest or convictions, we oftentimes have to file sooner. So that's happening there. A case review office visit's a fancy term for what used to be called, what do they call it? Like a disciplinary, like come meet with us type of meeting. We said, no, let's use some strength-based language and let's shoot a letter out or an email to somebody and say, hey, let's have a phone or video conversation about your status and help people through those things. So that's just one way we can address behavior or do like intermediate sanctioning without having to go to a violation. I mentioned step downs from the field, so I won't go much further into that other than that's an incentive for people to do well. And then that incentive within our services, we have a thing called PSC Gold, which we offer in that orientation to people. If you get your special conditions done within these first 6 months of supervision, we can step you down where you don't have to make that monthly phone call. You get a quarterly email from us. And so they can step down from them having that stress of possibly having to make that phone call. And it's just kind of a nice little brass ring or carrot to motivate them to get things done. And then as Bill urged us to consider, early discharges are a huge piece of it as well, right? If we can encourage people to get those things done and do what they need to do, it's a nice incentive. And like I said, with low risk, pro-social people, those things go a long way. Court document writers and court coverage, that's the formalities. Those are the things you guys are familiar with. And our agents are writing that through our systems as well. Next slide. I just wanted to look at some recidivism. I know everyone uses different definitions and explanations. So just to kind of, when I say recidivism in Ramsey County, I'm talking about a new offense that is a misdemeanor or higher that resulted in conviction. So an arrest isn't necessarily recidivism. It's going to be a misdemeanor level or higher offense that results in conviction. And we're starting from their start date, and the periods we're going to show you here, 3-year periods, are cumulative. So after 3 years, it's a cumulative number. So if you can go to the next slide, I can just kind of show you. This slide hopefully speaks to the efficacy of doing what we do. So what you can see here on the left slide, the 3-year recidivism by unit, the probation service center versus our field units, you're almost seeing like a 50% reduction in the recidivism rates of those individuals. That's suggesting that it's an appropriate way of supervising them and that they're fairly successful in what they're doing with us. To the right is support for what Bill was describing, and that risk is the way we should assign people, not necessarily based on offense. These are the recidivism rates based on risk and probation units. So what that found was in those instances where individuals went to the field or they were assigned to probation service center, you had about a similar recidivism rate. The amount of resources that go into asking people to have carry caseloads of 50 to 100 individuals far exceed our 11 people supervising 3,000 plus individuals. So it's a really good argument for the bang for your buck and using a low risk reporting technology based supervision model. One thing we've continued to see over the years is that our medium risk individuals recidivate very similar to our high risk individuals. And for that point, PSC used to take medium risks right into our unit at initial assignment, but we've now set those rules for that step down so that we can provide them that stability and that access to an agent before they step down. And we've seen more success in people stepping down to us, moving from medium to low, than initially signing people to PSC as a medium. So I mentioned in 2024, there are 0 exclusionary rules, and that may surprise some of you because what that means is we have predatory offenders, domestic abusers, DWI individuals under our supervision, our low risk supervision. That could be unheard of to some folks. And like I said, 6 years ago, there were 18 different offenses that said, no, you can't come to us. Well, we have enough data here to show that if you're assessed as low risk, you really should go to the low risk supervision, and we will see more success in doing so. Next slide. All right, let me gather my breath, take a sip of water here, and I will pull question you. How are you currently managing low risk clients? Susan, you can let me know once you have some results.
Will do. Okay, so we see them in person like all other clients. We have 7% there. They report remotely by phone or online, 33%. Combination of the two, that's about 40%. They do not report at all, 9%. And then we have 12% that are doing something other than those options.
Awesome. Yeah, that's promising. That sounds like you guys are fairly progressive in how you're doing work. I know other people have spoken to are like, no, we're back to 5 days a week and everyone comes to us. So that's cool to hear. Thank you. So I imagine I'm preaching to the choir in some ways. It sounds like you guys probably are having to utilize technology to do some of those things. So that's promising. That's cool. So I hope you're still finding this informative. Just to look at some quality of service stuff, I've thrown a lot of data at you and I probably bored you to death on a Friday afternoon. I hope not. I hope I've spoken to the efficacy of using technology to do low risk supervision. But in terms of like, what do the people say though, and what are they getting? We did a survey as of January of 2024. And what we found was 99% of clients agreed that PSC showed them respect. 96% agreed that PSC cared about their progress. 92% in a timely manner. 94% agreed it was easy to get documents to us. And 98% agreed they understood what they needed to get off of probation. When you got these numbers, my first thought was, I want to higher feedbacks than 10%. But then my second thought was I couldn't pay to get better feedback from our clients. Like when we wake up every day and we go to work to do this work, that's what we're shooting for. And to get that feedback tells me we're doing something right. And I hope that also shines a light on the fact that you could do low risk supervision utilizing technology and not lose that quality of service. Because oftentimes an argument for not doing this type of is you're losing that human interaction or you're not having that personal touch. Now those things are needed, and we should couple any conversation around technology and supervision with the need for that human element. But I hope this sheds some light that you can still have some of that human element in like a high volume, low risk, technology based supervision model. Next slide. I just want to hit on the navigating resistance and getting buy-in because it definitely is a part of the work. You know, as the supervisor of this unit, there is a lot of it is managing that and doing like stuff like this to kind of say, no, it's not just a virtual caseload. It's not just nobody there. That there's a lot to this. But I also want to like acknowledge that happens, right? So you have administration concerns, like certain types of offenses. Agents are like, this person's too risky, or maybe they're too needy, right? Part of the risk need responsivity model that gets forgotten at times in conversations is that need piece. So somebody assessed as low risk, which, as Bill said, doesn't mean no risk, oftentimes can have high needs, right? And so having those conversations and navigating those things with agents can be hard. Judges, I love the point that Bill made about doing it on the front end. Do that PR work on the front end, get agreements, get that buy-in, because the buck stops with the courts. Like they don't want their name in the paper, and they don't want to hear about bad things that happened. And so it's fair concern. Clients seem to appreciate the option, but at the same time, you may have clients that are low functioning. You may have clients that are just don't like technology. So you have to have ideas of ways to work with those individuals as well. So, Fieldware has been great in the sense that it's Spanish capable. So any of our Spanish speaking clients can also be on that remote reporting system. So just being mindful of there's different lenses, there's different perspectives, and there's real concerns, and just navigating that. A lot of it has to do with just PR and explaining what you do, and then do what's based in like research and evaluate, what's supported, build your house on that rock. I mentioned the fear of change and technology. Fear of change, it's not unique to corrections or probation. But that's just something we manage. And I can tell you one of my most effective remote reporting probation officers is 65 years old. Was mad that I made him leave the office during COVID. Had a newspaper delivered to his house up till about a year ago because he wanted to tangibly feel it. He's one of our best ones now, and he's one of the ones saying, hey, use the Cisco Jabber for your phone calls, use the Teams for communication. Let's put you in Fieldware because I trust that you'll be able to do that. So it's been fun to see a whole range of people in different generations, different styles, but even some of the folks you may say they would never be bought into this would have become part of that solution. It's really been powerful when you get those folks with a lot of experience to buy into this type of approach. The concerns expressed by people about offense were mentioned earlier by Bill. To explain to somebody why a predatory offender is on low risk supervision can be a difficult conversation to navigate. Things, and some of the most the ones that are perceived to have the highest risk have the lowest recidivism rates, right? So you really have to lean on that data, and just be honest in those conversations and transparent. Same with like contact standards. This person needs to see somebody more often. We have to kind of just lean on that science and what people are, people far smarter than myself that are pulling data and pulling experiences are saying about what works. Because it's easy to have that knee-jerk reaction to I know what works, or this feels right, or this is what we've always done. I see a question popped up, and I'm hoping it feeds into this next survey question. So if I can go to the next slide and pose the survey question, then I can take a look at the chat as well. What pushback are you receiving from others in the system, including staff, judges, prosecutors, or the community? And I'm going to read Spencer's question. Well, it says if clients submit information via text, how is that recorded in the Fieldware or CMS, or do you use technology that is direct CSM to phone text messaging? I can let maybe Fieldware answer the technicalities to all that, but I can tell you that the text can be sent and received within the software system itself, and then it's saved within the chrono notes or the case notes in terms of what was said. And it's really slick because it almost looks like a text thread on like your phone in terms of back and forth. But I can let them speak to the specifics on the back end. Great question, Spencer. So Susan, we'll get the results on this one, and then maybe I can have you guys talk more about the specifics on the back end with Fieldware.
Okay.
More promising feedback. Yeah. Go ahead. You can read out loud.
Sure. So what we've got is actually a variety of answers this time. No pushback. They embrace our best practices. 42% said that, and congrats to you. You're lucky. That's awesome. They do not believe in treating low-risk clients any differently, about 14%. They're on the fence. We're taking baby steps, 22%. And then we have another 22% who said other in terms of feedback.
I mean, it sounds like even though we're doing this and even though we have the majority, like we have no restrictions on what low risk people could come to us, that feedback tells me that a lot of these same conversations are happening in your guys' spaces as well. And I think they're all fair and warranted, right? So we have some really good best practice research saying, let's do this. We have some good, hopefully, examples like I've shared with here today that say, yeah, look at this works. It's pretty effective. And then you have a whole bunch of other perspectives and beliefs. So just navigating that in a professional, ethical way, I think is key. So, well, I thank you for your time. Appreciate Fieldware asking me to come talk a little bit about how we use their tool. Hope I get a chance to meet you all in person someday. And do not hesitate to reach out if you have any specific questions about the Ramsey County Probation Service Center. I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, I guess that comes to me. So Spencer, I'm going to get to your question in just a second. So just really quickly, I'm literally, I have like 5 minutes at best to even talk. So thank you for hanging in there on a Friday. I'm in Michigan. Again, my name is Peterson. So for me, it's already 5:30. So I work for Fieldware. So I'll get to the question in just a second. I've been with Fieldware for like 2 years. I actually come from community corrections in Michigan for 23 years. I was a supervisor in pretrial for 23 years. And that's how I landed now with Fieldware. And also just kind of a side note, I'm also a trainer. I don't know if a lot of you have heard of the Carey group, Carey guides. I'm also a trainer for the Carey group for the past 7 years, I think now. In best practices. So a little bit of experience, a little bit of knowledge on this end. So again, I'm just going to kind of wrap things up. But before I jump into there to get to your question, as far as the texting within the Fieldware system, so you can text back and forth within Fieldware. It's all housed within the system. We can push that information back. If you have a CMS, can push that information back over to there. To your system, as well as we house everything historically within our system. So it never goes away. And then the other little tidbit in that is within texting, they can also send you, pictures, to the officer if they need verification of something. We can accept different pictures, videos, things like that. And again, we house all of that within our system. So it's there being held if it's not pushed back into a CMS. Let me see. And looks like there was a secondary question. What, if any, technology are you using that is automating report writing? Oh, that would be back to you, Jason. So I don't know if you want to take it before I finish up.
Can you say one more time, please?
What, if any, technology are you using that is automating report writing? Example, like AI.
Currently, we are not. We have some voice to text through our case management software. So if our agents are out in the field, they can do that voice to text on their phones, like to get their case notes in. And then, of course, those transfer into our Fieldware system each evening. But we're not utilizing AI specifically at the moment. There's a lot of conversation around AI, but nothing specific other than, most of us don't realize we're using AI in many other ways. There's predictive, like when you're writing an email or using a Teams message and it's saying, well, you're like, oh, I would have said that. I'm just going to click on that button. Those are ways we're using AI, but nothing else specifically right now.
So we just want to show you, Bill covered a couple of the APPA standards, and here's some additional ones that we thought were very relevant to the conversation today. We didn't have the time, obviously, to get into the weeds too deep into it. But just so you know, as you go through and have some really great light reading when you're trying to go to sleep, pull up the APPA standards. If you click actually at the top, there's a link. It says click title to download. You can actually download the standards. So it's yours for the viewing. You can find it on the APPA website. So, like I said, if you need some really great reading, have at it. And I'm not going to go ahead and go through all the different standards, but again, there's a lot of great information on, suggestions on how probation, should be handling their cases in best practice. Next slide, or last slide almost. So I just want to do some key takeaways from the day. I mean, thank you, Bill and Jason, for, you know, doing this with us. We really appreciate it. You know, we thought it was great timing with APPA releasing their standards, and, you know, how can the, you know, the field now get, you know, kind of embrace, you know, assessments. They've been around a long time, you know, but how do we really embrace all this change, right? And so we're providing the best service for our clients. You know, so some of the key takeaways are just start small. So a lot of you, it looks like, are already on the ball with this. And by the way, I saw some of the people, some of the names on here. So a big shout out to a lot of my my agencies are on here. So some of my agency partners. So thanks for coming to the webinar today. I appreciate you. But again, start small. If you're just starting out, you know, take it a piece at a time. And that goes to, you know, with any new change or anything that you do that you're trying to implement within your department, it's always good to just start baby steps, you know, take it one piece at a time. That way you don't get too overwhelmed with all the change. Because as we know, change is, you know, difficult, you know, in a lot of ways in life in general. You know, about identifying your low risk clients, really embrace that assessment, you know, trust the assessment. You know, I remember years ago when we implemented an assessment tool where I work, and they were so against it. You know, I know better. I know my person. I know this. And it was, you know, it was about getting people to realize that, you know, we unfortunately, we have that, you know, intrinsic bias sometimes, and we can't help it. We're human. And so that assessment tool kind of removes that bias that sometimes we can't help but have. And it gives us a better probability of recidivism than just our professional judgment just alone. Not that to say that our judgment doesn't count, because it absolutely does, but, you know, it helps keep us on track. You know, policies, you know, establishing policies regarding the low risk clients. It's really about the why. And I found as a supervisor, anytime that I would implement a new policy with my staff, I really was big on making sure they understood the why behind it, not just saying this is what we're doing and not giving any explanation, because that really drove a lot of that insecurity, that pushback, that resistance that I would get all the time. So I really wanted them to understand that this is why, this is what the evidence shows us. This is what the research shows us is effective, and why we're asking you to do this. You know, it's all about that consistency from really high up at a high level, all the way down to your supervisors and supporting them. And then the supervisors supporting the line staff, and having those team meetings and those discussions, and what barriers are you facing and what suggestions do you have, and being open-minded to, you know, thoughts, and then having that conversation. So you kind of, you know, work with that resistance, lower it, and then get everybody on that team. Like Jason had said, you know, really that teamwork mentality is so huge when you're trying to make these changes and getting people to buy into this. And also having those meetings with those judges. We know that judges, you know, aren't always fond of a lot of the changes that, you know, we want to make. So really getting them to understand the research behind these changes, and why it should validate, you know, what probation is doing. You know, remote reporting, utilizing the technology. You know, I'm going to come from the fact that you know, I work for Fieldware. Just so you know, I came to Fieldware because they were my program. I used them in pretrial. We had about 1,800 people on remote check-in for pretrial in Oakland County in Michigan. We never saw one person ever in person, kind of like Jason is saying. We did everything through Fieldware. They all checked in online through the Fieldware system, or, you know, by phone. And I was such a fan of the system, fan of the program. You know, when the opportunity came for me to go work for them, you know, I jumped at it. So I'm here because I'm a believer in it. I know it works. I did it for many years. So I don't want to tie you up too long. You know, we want to give an opportunity for any further questions. However, you know, if anybody is interested in, you know, learning more about what we can offer you, you know, we really pride ourselves as working, you know, as a team with your team. You know, we really try to be there for you. You know, I'm a client support, you know, manager for many agencies throughout the country. And I hope that my folks that are on here can hopefully say that I'm there for them. But if you're ever interested, our information is here on this last slide. you can contact us by the phone number or by the email or the website that's below on that slide. So again, I was told I only had about 5 minutes, so I think I've reached that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the next slide, and we can go ahead and maybe answer any questions anyone has. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Maggie. I got a little shout out from San Mateo. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I mean, this was very helpful. And I'm glad we got some interaction on the polls and some of the chats. Did we get to, it looks like the question that was posed in the chat. So are there any other questions? Feel free to either raise your hand at this point or go ahead and put it in the chat. As people are thinking, I do have to really thank many of you who are on this presentation who are actually, it's hard enough to do something on a Friday afternoon, but it's actually bumping up on Friday evening for a lot of you. So thank you so much. It does look like we have a question in the chat. How are other counties handling low risk offenders that are transient?
Can I mention real quick what I know I'm a Ramsey guy, right? But to answer that question about transient folks, we've seen a lot of success with our transient folks using our remote reporting because you can use anyone's phone. You can use your tablet or, you know, our local opportunity center, those are unsheltered, can access phones and computers in there. It allows for them to get a hold of us. So just want to note that, you know, anyone with a tablet or Wi-Fi or a phone has been pretty successful. Not to say some of those folks won't want or need to walk up, they will. But we've seen success. I don't know if that's always necessarily a disqualifier if folks are transient.
Jason? Any other questions? I mean, the information was so all-inclusive. I think you guys probably answered a lot of the questions that folks were probably having as you were going through it, which always makes for a very good presentation. And I do see that we have some follow-up as far as how to get more information. So appreciate that, Karen. And is there anything else Fieldware would like to share as it relates to that? We so appreciate your support of California probation and the work that we do here so that we can do these types of things and others. But is there anything else that you'd like to say in closing?
I don't think so. Again, I appreciate all of our partners in California. We have quite a few. So again, if anybody's interested in learning more, just please contact us. I'm actually probably going to be making a trip out to California around the first, second week of December. So I'd be more than happy to pop in and see anybody. But again, you know, thank you for attending. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we hear from some people. That would be great. I'd love to have more partners in California.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate it again and appreciate everybody's time on listening in. And, you know, I'm sure that folks will be available for follow-up as information, you know, needs to be looked at. And so it's good to have some numbers and email addresses to follow up. So with that, I think we can go ahead and stop the recording. And again, thank everybody. And